All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the JSA Ascension. Today, I have a very special guest, someone I connected with through Instagram, Miss Alicia J. So we had, I'm very excited to have her on today because the way we connected was different from, a lot of my other guests, just because like we just simply ran into each other on Instagram, and I thought it was a really important conversation to have because on the surface value, on the surface level, it would seem like we don't really have that much in common because as you know, we'll be getting into, later in the episode, Alicia is a lesbian woman. I am a straight man. She grew up in Ohio. I grew up in the Caribbean. So like on the surface level, you would really think that there's not too much, like that we have in common. So, but after we spoke back and forth a little bit, like I realized very quickly that there was a lot we connected on, a lot we agreed on, and I thought it was a really important conversation to have for a few reasons. So this conversation I think will be beneficial for everyone, but in particular, I really hope people from back home in the Caribbean like pay attention to this conversation. I really hope, people from the pro-Black community, pay attention, to this conversation. And I really hope, people from, religious communities also pay attention to this one. So we're going to touch on, like a few great topics and mostly her story, like on how she became what, we both consider politically homeless because I'm in the same category as her there. Some of the LGBT issues, that are going on in the world today. So those are some of the topics we're going to cover. So before, we get right into it, welcome, Alicia. Can you introduce yourself a little bit more for the viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jay. I appreciate it. It's definitely a privilege to be on your podcast. You've had some pretty prolific people on. The resume is good. So I'm super psyched to be here. As Jay said, my name is Alicia J. I grew up in Ohio. I grew up in a real rural community, about 20 minutes from Amish community. That's how rural it was. Originally from South America, I was adopted as a baby at 9 months and was brought to the States. I grew up in a white household, Judeo-Christian evangelical, very conservative. Two of my other siblings, not blood related, but we were also adopted. So my parents, they internationally adopted 3 times. And then they have a son of their own who's biological and he's also white as well. So I grew up in an all white community. So I'm sure it's got some interesting stories and definitely a different world. But yeah, I work in software engineering. I've done that for about 3 years. And as Jay said, I consider myself politically homeless. Definitely not politically correct by any means. My sense of humor, I have a little bit of a dark sense of humor. And yeah, I'm an avid learner of history. And I love connecting with people from different backgrounds because I think there's a common human element with all of us, even if our cultural differences, our religious differences, maybe our lack of religious differences. There's a lot to transcend there. So I'm super excited to be here.
Exactly. And I think, one of the, more negative turns, like, the world and in particular America has taken, like over the past 10, 20 years, is the inability for people to agreeably, like disagree. And I think that's, like at the core of why both you and I, like are considered, like politically homeless, like in a few different respects. I think, if there's nothing else you will take from this conversation, just know it's okay to disagree with someone without assuming the other person has bad intentions, or like has an agenda, because unfortunately there will be some people after this interview who accuse me of pushing an agenda, or something like that. So
Right.
just because of the fact that I'm talking to someone like who they may or may not agree with. And I would be hopeful that a lot of these people like listen to this conversation and get rid of some of those, stereotypes they may have about the LGBT community, after this conversation, because you have some really, like interesting views that we'll get into in a moment. But to start things out, like a little bit, I remember you had mentioned to me, like as far as your, political leanings go, I believe the last campaign that you were actively involved in was Bernie Sanders' campaign, if I remember correctly, right?
Actually, it was Barack Obama's
Oh,
2012
okay,
election.
okay.
Yeah,
Barack
yeah,
Obama's.
Barack
Okay,
Obama's in 2012. That was the year I was old enough to vote. I
okay.
was very, very avid left wing,
Mm-hmm.
typical millennial at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and did the canvassing door to door, did the phone bank, all of that. So that was the last actual active election that I was involved in.
Okay, got it, got it. So, what originally drew you to the Obama campaign? What made you decide not only were you gonna vote for Obama, but you were gonna get out there and try and like, canvass for him and to try and get him in office?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is you might have guessed, and some people might have guessed, being in rural Ohio, it's typically very red.
Mm,
So that
mm,
area was already kind of a conservative hold
mm-hmm,
anyways. But I think a lot of it was influenced by a number of things. I think, especially at the time, when you talk about politics and you talk about different, types of way to bring in voters, the
mm-hmm,
Democrats at that time, and they continue to do so, is to really
mm-hmm,
play on political identities. And at that time,
mm,
there was a big emphasis move towards the conversations around things like immigration, the LGBT, women's rights, all that sort of thing. So I, being as as a teenager, kind of naive to that, okay,
mm-hmm,
here's a political troop that says, I'm going to be here for you, this is what we stand for, we have your best interests. Versus at the time, we're looking at the opposite of that. That side
mm,
didn't make such an emphasis, I think, from the minority perspective. So
mm-hmm,
I felt obviously more drawn to that side of things to say,
mm-hmm.
okay, well, here's a political agenda that fits my category. They want to, Latinas, gay, women,
Mm-hmm.
all things, just hit all the check marks. So that, I think, from my own naivety, was really just, that's what kind of echoed me towards that area,
Okay.
especially.
Okay, that's interesting. So, personally, I've always been someone, I studied economics in college for, people who don't know. So I have like a financial background. I've worked in finance and education throughout most of my career. And so like coming from that background, a lot, some people might expect that, most people, with that background lean more towards the conservative side, but I've actually always, leaned more to the left on a lot of economic issues when it comes to, like things like Medicare for all, when it comes to, racial justice, like that kind of things. I've always leaned, like more towards the left, for those reasons. So, but, as time has gone on, especially over the last few years, I've grown a greater appreciation, like for people who I disagree with, on both sides of the spectrum. And, I actually had a unique experience in college where I was part of a conservative program called the Fund for American Studies, where I was pretty much like the only person with like left-leaning, economic philosophies in the program. So that was kind of my introduction to learning how to like exist and agreeably disagree,
Hmm.
like with people while still doing my best to understand, like
Right.
where they're coming from. And over the last few years, there have been a few more things that have, pushed me more towards, the center on a few issues, which we'll get into in a second. So,
Hmm.
as far as your journey goes, so you found yourself being drawn to the left because you thought the left was advocating more for people like you, and it is true. I think like we'll both agree that there's a faction on the right that really isn't as friendly like towards people in your community, but then you do have libertarians who may be a little bit closer to where you are now. So what was the what can you describe the moment in time where you started to question like whether or not the people on the left who claim to have all these values, at their core, where you start to question whether or not that was the case? So when did you start to question that?
It was ironically, it wasn't anything that was really perspective to LGBT issues or women issues or minority issues. It was when I started kind of going down the rabbit hole of things like regime wars. Was kind of like where I went. So I started reading Ayn Rand, who is a good author that I like to read, and I started looking at some of the economic stuff. But the real kind of red pill, quote unquote, red pill moment for me was understanding the military complex and realizing the Obama administration was largely responsible, as were previous administrations. But I think for me, it kind of struck me interestingly enough. And I don't have enough know-how from a Middle Eastern perspective to understand some of the conflicts, so I won't try to comment too much on that. But I was very taken back. I think there was one instance in the Obama administration where the use of drones has become pretty mainstream in the military towards a family in Yemen at a wedding party.
Yeah,
and so I started asking myself, why. Okay, we advocate for freedom and the safety of
and
people
minorities.
and minorities, and these are brown people overseas that are being bombed senselessly, and these aren't people that are ISIS agents or
they're at a wedding.
Yeah, they're at a wedding. They're just normal citizens, and these citizens may or may not agree with Western values, but that doesn't mean that they don't have any value. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
that was a bit of a question for me. And I think when WikiLeaks kind of dropped too, I started going through that, and I was really, I think it was an alarming thing for me, because then it starts at one thing and then it kind of just unfolds as the deeper you go in, and I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, because a lot of people say, well, you went the Alex Jones route, but like there's a lot of things that happened. There's a lot of things that came true, as we can laugh about those things, but there's a lot of things that came true. And so it went from the drone strikes in the Middle East, which I for many years being brought up in the evangelical Judeo-Christian church too. You're brought up to support Israel, no questions asked. And I won't get too much into that, because there's a lot of things I don't know, and I'm not the type of person to pretend that I do know the full scope of things. But I thought it was strange that there's this conflict, and the explanation for the Middle Eastern conflict and my upbringing was, this is a 3,000-4,000 year war that's happened since biblical times, and like these people want to kill the Jews, and this sort of thing. So that didn't suffice for me as an answer. I felt like it was much more complex, and I was given very antiquated responses as to why things were the way that they were. So that was kind of the red pill moment for me. I was like, wait a minute, like we really are true arbitrators of peace for people, then why are we doing A, B, and C?
Yeah. That's a great point. And just to jump in really quick, during the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, there was definitely a bigger push from the right, like towards like some war. But what I've actually found since then is, since those two wars, the Democrats have been the party of war. If you look at what happened during the Obama administration, Obama started more wars. And this is, I think, a moment where people from the pro-Black community should really like take a look at why we celebrate people like just doing, like, achieving things without asking ourselves, what are they doing with this position of power or with this achievement like that they got. Like, yes, I think Barack Obama getting elected was a powerful moment, like for Black people to understand that they are, capable of, like reaching those heights. However, the first Black president turned Libya, which was the second wealthiest, country in Africa, into a failed state. It happened under his watch. Like Libya before Gaddafi was removed was the second wealthiest state. They gave out free houses to people who got married. They were, what do you call it? They gave free healthcare to people. They have a lot of these values that people on the left, say they fight for. And then arguably, I would say the reason why Obama and, Hillary Clinton bombed Libya was because Gaddafi was trying to create a currency for all of Africa that was backed by gold, and that would have been a threat to the American dollar.
Absolutely. Yep.
So,
I went down that whole.
so everyone on the left claims to be about, like civil rights, like and all this stuff. But then I found that most of the people, like who claim to be fighting for equality didn't really criticize like Obama for turning the second wealthiest African country into a failed state. Like, and then after Obama, like left office and all, and that's just one war, he supported the war in Yemen, he supported, he did all the drone strikes that you mentioned, all these different things. And then Trump gets into office. Now, in my opinion, I think Trump is a very inflammatory person. I think that, he does have a little bit of a racist past, like if you look at what, like he did in New York. However, if you look at what his foreign policy was when he was in office, he was arguably much better for minorities around the world, not in America, but around the world.
Right, I would from an international.
From an international perspective, because he actually toned down the wars like that were happening overseas. He removed troops from Somalia. He was like starting to pull people back from the Middle East. Like he was doing all this, and then Joe Biden gets elected into office. And as of a few weeks ago, now America is bombing Somalia again. Now, like now America is trying to overthrow the government of Ethiopia by funding what a lot of people would consider a terrorist organization, the TPLF, like in Ethiopia, because the current government in Ethiopia is trying to unite those countries in the African Horn that have traditionally, had groups that don't get along so well. So it's like we say, like the left claims to be about all these things, but they refuse to call out people within their own party. And, it's really, I think if we would all be honest, like with each other and just have real conversations, like we would be in a much better place. So, so with that being said, I know you mentioned that you consider yourself politically homeless, like, so it's a little bit of the foreign policy driving that. Is there anything else, like about the left that you would say that you have questions about?
There's a lot of gaslighting, but there's gaslighting on both sides. You made a really interesting point. You talk about like we can't self-criticize our own leaders and certain parties, and that to me, there's a lot of that. You can't, and it'll tie in a little bit more. I also would say first, I'll back up a couple steps. I think my move towards the left was also very emotionally driven because again, I stated I came from a Judeo-evangelical background. And I came out and had a very hard time with it. And so it almost, the left at that time was very much the gay community obviously has been more left almost entirely through the last 30 years.
Just like the Black community.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the safe haven, right? You feel the most at home because you have peers and people that look like you, maybe have the same ideological backgrounds as you. So I think a lot of that emotional turn point was towards that. But I realized like the things you talked about, the foreign policy stuff was very alarming to me because, I was like, wait a minute, you can't advocate for, freedom and equal rights and things like that and then be hypocritical. But the larger encompassing part of that as well, though, was realizing that, two sides of the same bird kind of do the same thing. And they just do it a different way. So
exactly.
That's really
Good
what it
cop,
came down
cop.
to. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's kind of how it feels. because like on a lot of the major issues, you know, like both sides that present as left and right, like do actually agree. And, you know, we're seeing the same thing happen, you know, like right now with the Ukraine war, like for the most part, you know, like Republican leadership and Democratic leadership agree. However, if you look at the actual people in these parties, for the most part, the left right now is just like, yeah, you know, like support the people of Ukraine, you know, like Putin is evil. And yes, I do think, you know, the war shouldn't be happening. And it does seem to me as if Russia, you know, like is a little bit of the aggressor in the situation. But there was a long history leading up to that since the coup that, you know, happened a few years ago.
Yep.
So it's not as simple as Russia bad, Ukraine good, you know.
Well,
And
not only that, you know, the Azov battalion and the large percentage, I found it so interesting.
They're actual
early
Nazis,
on, they're actually neo-Nazis.
Yeah.
That's a very prevalent thing over there. And I find it so interesting when I'm scrolling through social media and I see people with gay pride flags next to Ukrainian. Ukrainian is outlawed same-sex marriage. Or I see, you know, my Black brothers and sisters who are advocating for Ukraine, and Ukraine is not traditionally known to be a very, you know, safe haven for people of color. So they're not very friendly to African Americans, anyone that's Black, and they're not friendly particularly to, and I don't want to make the mass generalization because not every Ukrainian is the same, but I'm saying as a societal whole, that's an emphasis. They don't have an emphasis on diversity. They don't have an emphasis on same-sex rights or anything like that. You know what I mean? So it's very ironic to me. But the fact that the neo-Nazis are, I believe they account for about 20% of their military. That's a reasonably large chunk.
Yeah, and I don't know like what the actual like, you know, percentage is, but what I would say is for people in America, right? You know, a lot of people, a lot of minorities in America understand how institutional racism, you know, like kind of functions, right? Where people don't come out and say like, you know, I don't like, you know, Black people or minorities, but what happens is the legislation, you know, that they wind up passing, like has an impact disproportionately, like on one group of people. But, and, you know, so people will, you know, show their true feelings and talk amongst themselves, like privately, but they know that publicly they can't really share, you know, like all their beliefs. And from what I understand, it seems like that same, you know, like institutional, like, you know, racism or institutional, you know, extremism does exist, you know, like over there and is tolerated. Now, that doesn't mean by any means that Ukraine deserves, you know, like what's happening to them right now. And in my opinion, war doesn't solve anything. Like, so the war shouldn't be happening. But like at the end of the day, they have, you know, like the Azov battalion, they use a Nazi symbol, like like for their actual battalion, and they're an accepted part, like of the Ukrainian military. Ukraine is the only country in the world with an established Nazi presence in their military. And now the left claims that you're, you know, like you're a Trump supporter or something like that if you don't agree, you know, with blindly sending billions and billions of dollars in weapons to Ukraine.
To these people,
like, yeah. Like, and like my thing is, right, like I saw a meme the other day, and you know, it hits home because like the left claims to be against the war, but then, you know, AOC was one of the biggest disappointments to me because I was very excited, you know, like about her getting into office. And she's just like, you know, Hillary Clinton now in terms of like how she votes. Yeah, in terms of like how she votes and like, you know, like what she does and all that. So it's like they say all these things, but now when you're faced with actual Nazis, like you're willing to support, you know, like one side blindly without questioning how did we get here. And I really think, you know, a little bit of self-introspection, you know, like and taking like looking at issues, at the nuances of issues is important, not just
Right.
blindly agreeing with whatever your side says you're supposed to agree with, but actually looking at the nuances of issues. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so that's,
Yeah.
that's a really important point. And yeah, so as far as some of the other issues go, like that
Mhm.
we touched on. One thing, I wanted to ask you. So you had mentioned to me before that you felt a little bit ostracized from people in the LGBT community for
Mhm.
some of your beliefs. Like, what are some of the
It's the hot
beliefs?
shit.
Yeah,
This is the
yeah,
hot
yeah,
shit.
yeah, yeah.
I think I'll try to start at the beginning with this. I think we have largely escaped from what the original intention, and I think that's
Mm,
that's most political movements. We see that with
mm,
BLM as of recent. A lot of
mm,
things, when they become very corporate, we see a lot of things that kind of deviate from the original intention. And there's a very loud vocal minority
mm.
in the LGBT. I call them the alphabet mafia because I remember a time uh when it was okay to make jokes,
Mm-hmm.
satirical jokes about being gay, and it was okay to make those jokes. And I've only dealt with homophobia, like direct homophobia from very like very religious people,
Mm,
um but like my peers that are straight, we might make jokes about being gay. Even like I have a lot of straight male friends,
mm-hmm.
and I look up to them, and they're very strong men in my life, and we can make jokes about being gay, and I can
Mm-hmm.
not take it so personally, because in Western civilization it's such a normalized thing. So there's no
Mm-hmm.
reason to really, we're not living in 1950 anymore. It's not the lavender
Mm-hmm.
scare. I'm not going to get fired because I'm gay.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to point out, like, being gay is not the most interesting thing about me. And I think
Mm,
the political left has done, and what
mm,
the LGBTQZIA community has done, has made it an emphasis that it is the entirety of their identity.
mm,
And gay people have been here for thousands of years. You see some of the most prominent people, Michelangelo, Alexander the Great. We have very prominent figures throughout history that have displayed either they had a same-sex relationship or whatever the case may be. So it's not anything new under the sun. But the reality is that it's not the most, when we think about people like that, it's not the most prominent thing we think about. We're
mm-hmm.
looking at their accomplishments. And I think part of the normalization of not making it such a big deal for me is, I don't need to like pull out a gay pride flag every 5 seconds and,
Mm-hmm.
wave it. To me, it's not the most important thing about me. It is absolutely a part of my story because it is
Mm-hmm.
instilled a struggle from a religious upbringing perspective. But when I came out, I was 15 years old. I have an older brother, and I told him, and I was very self-aware at such a young age that I was
Mm,
different. And I grew up in a very fiercely heterosexual family. There was no instances of, any of that exposure or anything. I had a very good relationship with my father and my mother. I grew up in a very happy and healthy home. So it wasn't just a lot of people, especially on the right, would allude to, well, were you sexually assaulted? Did you have a bad experience with a man or something like that? It's like, no, I have never had any of those things happen to me. I've been very fortunate. I have a good relationship with my brothers and my father, and I have a deep, profound respect for men. I think men play a very pivotal role in society, which unfortunately I feel like are being punched down on in our current state of things. I think men are allowed to be men to a certain extent. And so yeah, I grew up by all accounts a very normal child, a very normal and healthy childhood. And so being gay outside of the religious circle, and some of the just discrimination and issues I had with that, um, it's not the most intriguing facet about me. It really isn't. It's
mm,
very such a small component, and I understand people that make it much of a bigger issue might have dealt with more, discrimination and pushback from their communities and families. I understand that. But I think what we're seeing now, and as of recent, this is the first year that we've seen a percentage and approval for homosexuality in the United States, the acceptance of it. In the first 10 years, we've seen this. And I think it's largely, a lot of people say, well, it's all these Trump supporters or these right-wingers. No, it's my personal opinion is that it is most likely the source of the decimation of sex, the decimation of reality. Like, let's just be real. This whole entire trans movement, the political trans movement has, which in my opinion should be separate from sexual orientation. I don't think gender identity and sexual orientation are the same thing at all. And you know, I have friends that are trans that voted for Trump, ironically, and they share in the same, you know, thing. We have this overwhelming and overreaching push to tell children, let's just take, for example, you have a daughter, right? She's 8 or 10 years old, and let's say 20 years ago in the 90s, those were tomboys, right? I was a tomboy. My parents were fine with that. It was normal. And as I grew up and became a woman, I became more feminine. You see, I wear makeup and things like that. I was, you know, I had a nice little balance. I was always more masculine than my sister, and that was totally fine. It's cool. She's a tomboy. She likes to play football with the boys. She likes to skateboard, whatever the case may be. Now we're seeing where, and it's just fucking outrageous, where we see these young women who display maybe more masculine features. Maybe they don't want to play with Barbies, whatever the case is. Well, they must have gender dysphoria. You know, these children are saying, well, I feel like a boy. Well, I had 2 older brothers and I looked up to them and I was like, oh, it must be cool to be a boy, you know, when I was at that young age. But I grew out of that. It's same as a child saying, I want to be a dinosaur or something. You're not going to go cut their arms off and give them short T-Rex arms. So like there's no nuance, and it's so crazy to try to impose this gender, like, people have gender dysphoria. I want to make that very clear, that like I support people that have gender dysphoria, but the argument really is, do we need to be pushing hormones and puberty blockers on children? And this has become such a large case of the LGBT's argument. And that's why I feel like normal heterosexual people are looking at this saying, I don't want this pushed on my child. Like, I want my daughter to grow up and be, you know, fulfilled in both her masculinity and her femininity, and that be okay. She doesn't, you know, we don't need to direct a child. Children don't know what they want. Children don't know well into, you know, the brain's not even fully formed for women until 25. So I feel like, and so I feel for a lot of this, that the LGBT movement can't take this criticism. And my biggest criticism is that they are ignoring the biological differences between men and women.
And I think, you know, it's you know, it's so strange to me that most people, you know, would agree that, you know, children aren't old enough to consent to having sex, right? You know, like with an adult. So how can we, you know, like, we acknowledge that we don't send children to jail for the most part, you know, for crimes they commit, because they're like, you know, they're children. They don't really understand. Their brain hasn't finished developing. There's a lot of hormones going on. There's so many things going on in the mind of a child that, like, they're not considered capable of making permanent, you know, life-altering decisions as a child. And, you know, I had someone, you know, like in a group that I'm in, like a WhatsApp group that I'm in, accuse me of not understanding science, because I personally don't think that it's a good idea to, you know, freely give out, like, you know, hormone blockers to, you know, anyone who, like a child who claims, you know, like that they are the wrong gender. Because, you know, if you know, someone like you, you know, who was a little bit more masculine, was growing up, you know, like today, and, you know, like you would listen to the conversations that was happening, unfortunately, you might have been, you know, like led to believe that that you should change your sex and like, you know, and become a man. And it's like, no one talks about the consequences, like the long-term consequences of these decisions. And like, I truly believe I will call any consenting adult what they want to be called. if, you know, a person who was born a woman and is 25 years old tells me that, you know, they, you know, want to be called, like, if you wanted to be, you told me you wanted me to call you Alan, I'll call you Alan. I have no problem with that. Like, you know, like, I'll call you whatever. Like, if you want to, I think adults should be able to do whatever it is they want to do without getting discriminated against. I see nothing wrong with that. But I just don't understand why all of a sudden we're pretending like you can just hit pause on a child's puberty, and then, you know, like, the child is going to develop like naturally. If they decide 3 years later, oh no, you know, maybe I do want to continue to be a girl, that, you know, everything will be normal. Like, I don't understand how people can, like, seriously make that argument and, like, think, you know, like, it makes sense. So I think consenting adults should be able to do whatever it is they want to do. But in my opinion, I think we have to realize that, you know, for women, like women are in society have the pressure to look a certain way, the same way that men have the pressure to earn a certain amount of money.
Right.
So, you know, men's values traditionally, because of the society we have, a lot of men's value comes from their ability to protect and provide. And
Right.
unfortunately, you know, like, women get a lot of their value from, like, or they think they get a lot of their value because of the society we've created
I
from
think that's a
how
fair
they look.
statement, though. I think that's
Yeah,
a very fair statement.
yeah,
I think
from
that's
how they
absolutely
look. So if you're a woman who may not be developing as quickly, you know, like, as some of your other peers, like, you may feel like, and I've read, you know, articles from people who had that internal conflict. They thought that they were transgender because they weren't, like, the person straight up said in the article that they didn't think they were going to be like a beautiful, like, you know, voluptuous woman and all that. So she just wanted to be, you know, like a handsome man, like, you know, for a little while. And every one of the psychologists that her parents took her to told the parents, yes, your child is transgender. Yes, you should give this child's hormone blockers and let this child transition to a man. And then,
it's
like,
so asinine.
yeah. And then a couple years later, the girl realizes, oh, I'm actually straight, and you know, like, I want to be a woman. But because she was seeing all these images of women looking a certain way, and she didn't know if she was going to develop the same way, you know,
Right.
like, she wanted to make a permanent decision. And she's glad now that her parents didn't go through with that, because, you know, like, I personally, like, it's hard for me to imagine how you can just hit pause on puberty, like, and, like, give someone, like, hormone blockers. Like, if a child wants to dress like the other sex, like, I think, you know, like, that's something, you know, like, the parents, you know, like, have the choice to do it. I think personally you should let people, you know, do whatever it is, you know, they want to do, and there's no harm, you like, in letting someone act, you know, or identify however they want to. But if you're gonna take it to the point, like, where we're giving people, like, hormone blockers and preventing their development, it's just a different situation. So, you know,
Absolutely.
yeah, so it's weird.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
yeah, so, sorry, what were your thoughts
No,
on
you're good. I want to interject for a second. So
that?
I personally feel that the push to do that is internalized, is can be traced back to internalized homophobia. If we look in
Mm,
I can't remember, I think it's Iraq and one other Middle Eastern country.
mm,
So homosexuality is illegal there.
mm-hmm,
But one of the things that they will encourage is that if a male is homosexual, particularly in Iraq, they will have, and
mm,
don't quote me, I know it's two of the Middle Eastern countries, they will actually push them to transition into a woman. So it's
mm-hmm,
much more acceptable for them to be a transsexual than it
mm-hmm,
is to be a homosexual. So I think a lot
mm,
of this, and I'll also bring it back to another thing. I think that what we're seeing, and it's particularly happening with young women, and I'm not, I know it happens with young men, but we're seeing a very large group of young women between the ages of I'm gonna say it's between 15 to 25. So
mm-hmm,
it's pretty 10-year age stats there, but they're the ones that are particularly susceptible to this. And I think what it has become a social contagion, in my opinion. A lot of women, you talk about women not feeling, they fit that mold of femininity that's being perpetuated. And so they think, well, I'm never going to fit this. So I must be the opposite. And I think it's normal for any child through puberty to feel weird about their bodies. Men do too. I have two older brothers. Like, it's normal to feel that way. That doesn't mean you have to make a permanent change. And what's even more asinine is recommending puberty blockers for children that are experiencing gender dysphoria or feeling uncomfortable, body dysmorphia, whatever it may be. There are permanent changes to that. You can go on a Reddit thread of D-trans. You will see over 30,000 people in that thread, and it's mostly young women. And a lot of them, what they came to understand was there was a lot of internalized homophobia. Well, I really was just gay, but I couldn't accept that I was a gay masculine woman, or I couldn't accept that I was just a masculine straight woman. So I felt like I needed to fit into this mold. Somebody told me I was, a man instead of a woman. And it's so strange to me because it really goes back to self-esteem issues too. It's like, can you own who you are? If you're more effeminate, if you're more masculine, just those are expressions. That isn't, there's not 62 genders for that. It's just who you are. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay. Like, it's fine. It's ridiculous to decimate the biological reality that there's man and woman. There always, because let me tell you something, you die
there
today.
Are consequences. There are consequences of that, like even after you're done with the original surgery to like change your sex, like they do have to usually have procedures, like later on in life. So if you make that permanent change, which is your decision, like we can do it. We know how to turn a penis into a vagina. So if you want to do it, we can do it. But like there are long-term consequences like to that don't get discussed as much. And there's absolutely no way that a child like it can really assess can process all the pros and cons and consequences of what they're about to do. And like I've read, like a little bit about, like complaints, like from some people about losing, some feeling, like down there, like after they make the surgery and all that. So it's like, you're not even giving like children the chance to experience what they have, as it's fully developed before they make what's going to be a life-altering decision. You can't just hit pause on puberty and then expect that person to develop the way they normally would. Like, like if you didn't do it. And the fact now that what I just said would be considered anti-science to a lot of people on the left.
It's not
like, so
that was the push of the threshold, because I'm of a traditional belief. Like my mother and my father, I came from a very traditional upbringing, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. My father's a very masculine, typical American red-blooded man, and my mother wasn't very feminine, but more feminine in some retrospects. So I think it's just so strange to me that there is such this disdain for traditional roles for men. It's okay. Like I'm a lesbian and I'm not threatened by men. And I think the stereotype is that most lesbians hate men, but that's not true. Men are typically the providers in a traditional household. Like those things are important. So this essence of like gender confusion, I think there's nothing wrong with being, the tomboy girl, or maybe you have a son that's more effeminate in some ways, but to perpetuate that they have to be the opposite sex, we need to do these extreme links. And I've had conversations with people that work in social work specifically that have talked about this prevalently, and they've said, we can discuss alternative ways with people who have legitimate gender dysphoria. Transitioning to the left is the only way to remedy the feelings. But the reality is, like, if the child legitimately does have gender dysphoria, what can we do that's not a permanent? You brought up an excellent point. You know, if the child wants to dress a certain way, dress a certain way. It doesn't have the long-term physical implications that cutting off puberty would have. And so
Exactly.
there's a few prominent trans influencers. I think it's Buck Angel and Blair White are very prominent, and then they're both transsexuals. They're both fully transitioned adults, and I don't think anybody would combat their views on what they think. And they've even advocated that children do not need to be transitioning. That's a very your children can't even consent to sex, but you want them to go into under the knife. Like that's a very that's a touchy place to go. So and that's where I get a lot of the flack from people that are LGBT because I apparently deny the reality. I don't deny the reality of sex. And I don't think there's anything such as non-binary. I don't think there's anything such as genderqueer. I think these are made up terms, in my opinion. They're all part of a larger facet of what's known as queer theory. And there's a lot of gay people, reasonable common sense gay people like myself. I know many of them. I have lots of them on Instagram. We've had long conversations. We aren't allowed to say anything. We're not allowed to speak out because you know, there's a few prominent people that I follow, like they've been doxxed, they have been threatened by people, and I swear to God, it's usually people with like Furby or anime profile pictures. It's so wild to me, but like we're not allowed to have an opinion, and it's weird. It's so weird to me that like it's typically gay men too that I'm very close with a group knit of them, and we talk about this, and there's like there are moral implications for what you guys are doing. Not only are you making normal gay people who otherwise would just go on with their lives and live quietly, find a partner, you know, have a house, pay taxes, whatever the case is, you're making all of us look fucking stupid because we don't want those people over there. I don't know those people. Dave Chappelle did a great bit. He said, I don't know about these new gays. The Stonewall gays I can fuck with. But like these new gays are different. These new gays get offended at everything, and like it's crazy to me. Like we should be able to joke. Homosexuality is such a very small percentage of the population, and LGBT should be a small percentage of the population. It's not near as prevalent as we're making it. It's become a trend, and it's like people that really went through real shit, like people like myself and people that went through actual moral implications from their families and things like that. Like we're just trying to live our lives, and you have to go through and make this a bigger deal than what it really is, because the reality is it's a luxury of living in Western civilization. You go over, I met a young woman years ago from Syria who lives in a mostly Muslim community. She had to flee because her parents found out that she was gay. And honor killings, unfortunately, in her culture and her community are very prevalent. She had to flee and she moved to Chicago. So the things that we're complaining about with this bullshit, with this pronouns and all this stuff, like I'll respect you, whatever the case is, but don't be surprised when people, normal people, are just trying to, you know, especially heterosexual families are just trying to go through life, and you're trying to pull out every single color of the rainbow and make this an entire identity thing. Like it's just crazy to me.
Yeah, and I saw like a screenshot, a tweet that was going around the other day from, it seemed like, I guess someone who's prominent, like in the LGBT community. I don't remember what this person's name was, but like the person made a tweet saying that they hope that Rihanna's new child, who's a boy, like turns out to be gay, because otherwise he's just gonna be like a loser straight man. And it's like, and like I just wonder, like, why would you, if I think people should be allowed to do whatever it is, like they want to do, but why attack like like all straight men and say Rihanna's child is going to be a loser, like, if she's not if he's not a gay man? Like it's so weird to me, like, that someone would say something like that. And it's like, I really want everyone from the communities, in particular, that I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, because in the Caribbean, it's not as bad, like as you just described, right? Like that some people like in Syria have to deal with, where their lives are consistently threatened on a daily basis. But it's not as open, like over there, like as it is over here. And I think what's happening right now, with some of the things that are, being said, like with the trans conversation, is making people from the Caribbean, from, some people in the pro-black community and all this other stuff, like it's making them more extreme because they think that all LGBT people
Right.
believe, like in these things, that there's 63 genders. That there's 63 genders. And we have to stop assuming people are monoliths. And we have to realize that oftentimes the most extreme voices do get amplified the most. Like if you like get out there and say something, like what that person said about Rihanna's child, like that's gonna get screenshotted and sent everywhere. But someone who said something like what you just said, like that you don't believe there's 63 genders, that's not gonna go as far. And unfortunately, a lot of people would attack you for it from the left, like you said. So we have to stop assuming that everyone, like the most extreme voices, represent, like everyone in those communities. So I'm really glad
I can empathize with that. Like I've never been to the Caribbean. I would love to go. I will say in the left circles that I used to be in, it was always a point of contention because of some of the attitudes towards homosexuality. But I've had friends that went to Egypt and were gay, and you follow the cultural customs of that area. I've always been of the belief is as long as you're, for the most part, as long as you're not violating any expected customs, you can go. That's their belief.
For the most part, gay people are safe in the Caribbean. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what I am trying to say is the way, like it's a little bit more accepted, like in America, like, if someone like you wouldn't really face, like discrimination, but for people who live there and, like maybe gay, they're not going to be nearly as comfortable coming out, like in the Caribbean, as they would be, like in America. And if you really think about the consequences of that, there's nothing good that comes from that, because like your life, Alicia, probably would have been a little bit less complicated, like if you weren't gay, considering how you grew up.
100%.
Yeah. So it's like, so no one is like, I think there very few people like, like who are gay because they think it's making their life easier. So the only thing that happens is these people get forced into relationships with other people, with the other sex, that are never going to be successful. Because if you have a man who isn't comfortable admitting that he's gay, what he's going to feel is societal pressure to marry a woman who's going to ultimately feel unappreciated and unsexy because her husband is not very sexually attracted to her. So you put the woman in a tough position to have to deal now with a person who isn't really attracted to them. And they're probably going to internalize that and think, well, am I not sexy? Am I not beautiful? Because my husband like isn't that attracted to me.
It's a Janet Jackson movie. It's a For Colored Girls. It's the same situation. She figured out her husband was having sex with men. And unfortunately that's a too prominent issue from what I've read. It's let's not put women through that. Let's not put men through that. Just be real.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
If we create a society where people are comfortable being who they are, like if you wanted to get into politics, like, in my country in Turks and Caicos, it's impossible for me to imagine a gay man being elected, an openly gay man being elected in Turks and Caicos at this point. Like I hope I'm wrong about that. And I hope, like that does change quickly. But I can't imagine it like right now because they're just not gonna be accepted, like the same way that a regular, like politician would. So it's like, not a regular, but like a straight,
that makes sense.
like a straight
man,
politician would.
absolutely.
So it's like the only, like by forcing people to hide, you're not going to change like what they're attracted to. Like they're
Right.
still going to be attracted to the people. So you can quote all the books in the world that were written by goat herders and sheep herders, 2,000 years ago about how, like they thought that being gay was wrong. You can quote all that. It's not going to
Right.
change the feelings of the people, like, who are attracted to people of the same sex. So
Right.
you have two choices. You can either make them feel ostracized and try to force them to blend in, which has bad consequences for everyone, or
Right.
you can recognize that we're all independent, sovereign people. And if you're gay, Alicia, that's not going to make me gay. Like, it's not going to make me go have
That's definitely
sex,
not my agenda either. Like,
yeah, yeah. So it's
without
like, yeah,
straight people, we would have no gay people. So I would say
yeah.
this weird hate towards straight men in general is very strange to me because um I've never had a negative like experience with with perception of my father, the men in my family. Like
Mhm.
I think masculinity and heterosexuality is it's what perpetuates the human race. I don't know why people, would get so upset about those things. That's
Yeah,
just my
so,
personal opinion. I can see what people may who have had bad experiences would attribute that and make a large monolithic, generalization about that. But um, like I said, I've never seen what the problem is. And really, you brought up an excellent point. Like no matter what you do, because a big facet of my experience was my parents wanted to send me to conversion therapy, and I've had
mm,
friends that went to conversion therapy, and it ultimately ruined their lives because nothing changed. Um, but it only inflicted more pain in their life as a result
mhm,
of it, and that's trauma that they've had for 10, 15 years. So
mhm,
I was able to get out of that before I was even initiated into some sort of program like that. But really, it came down to this. It's like I think, and this is just my perception. People that are unaccepting to homosexuality, they traditionally see the images that media perpetuates of what
mhm,
gay is and what we're seeing now, the LGBT mafia, so to speak. But a normal gay person like myself, like many people that I know, that it's not, it's an important part of us, but it's not the most important part. I think society as a whole would be more accepting if people just didn't make it such this huge fucking production. Like a lot of people in the gay community really lean into these identities of being like super over flamboyant. It's like, man, just be yourself. Like you weren't like that before you came out, you
mm.
know. But it's a sense of identity that I think they clutch into, and I'm definitely guilty of being that way initially when I came out. I was like gay this, gay that, and then I realized I was like, man, I look really fucking stupid
Mm.
making this my entirety of my identity. It's like the least important thing about me. And that's just how I feel though.
Now, that's a very interesting point, and that actually takes me to like another point that I wanted to touch on with you. So, you're seeing a very large. It feels, I don't know how you would feel about this, but it seems to me like there is a push to introduce the topic of sexuality to children, like
Yes.
like at a very very early age, right?
Yes.
And
Yep.
like we have to, as soon as kids hit second, third grade and they can speak, we have to start telling them about different ways to have sex, and you got this and you got this, and like like and like my thing is, like, I'm just really thinking back to when I was a kid, right? I don't remember like thinking about sex a lot until I hit puberty, which
Right.
would have been, like about what, like 11, 12 or something like that.
Right.
So it's like, I do agree that we have to have an accepting society, and we should
Right.
teach people early on that different people, like different things. I have nothing, like against that. But it seems like there is a push to, like, I've seen actual textbooks
Yeah.
like that are being given out to like third and fourth graders, talking about, like, anal sex and, like, different ways to like have sex and all
We
that. And I'm
laugh
just
about it, but
wondering,
it's
like,
like that's really fucked up, in
yeah,
my
like
opinion.
why are
Yeah.
we introducing this to
Yeah.
children before they're even thinking about it? Like, I don't know. What do you think? Like, do you think there's have you seen that? Is that
Yes,
something?
yeah.
Yeah.
I went to a bookstore. I want to say it was last year. There's a small bookstore in my city. And there's like an LGBT section. And I was
Mm-hmm.
with my girlfriend and we went over there and we looked at it. And she particularly works in social work. So, these things kind of concern her as well. And I apologize, my dog's in the back here, kind of being
Okay.
crazy. But um there was a drag queen book. It was like
Mm-hmm.
ages 5 to 8, and it was talking about how to tuck your penis and
For
how
five to
for
eight year
five
old.
to eight year olds. And I was looking at this shit and I was looking at it, taking pictures of it, and I'm like, wait, hold up a second. And it was talking about different ways to tuck and like what a bottom was, what a top was. And I'm thinking, why the fuck does any child need to know any of this? And the same route, I will say, I saw a book the other day, Dr. Carlin Borsenko, definitely look her up. She's a libertarian,
Mm-hmm.
but she just wrote a book on how to be unwoke, basically,
Mm.
and talks about it. And there was even a book that was in a children's library, was with heterosexual sex, and it was a young boy, and he's talking to his brother, and his brother's telling him, I like to come inside of my girlfriend, and this is what happens to my penis. And I'm like, yo, listen, like, it was very detailed. I have to send you it. But I was like, explaining, and his brother's like 16, and this child that's talking to him in the book is about 10. I started reading it, and he's like, this is what I do to my girlfriend, and he's like, you can do this someday too. And I'm like, you don't need to be talking to kids about this. Like, I'm on the same page with you as that. I think it's very weird. I think it's strange. I think it's inappropriate. I think James Lindsay particularly touches really well on a lot of that, and it's very strange to me. And I definitely think
Yeah.
there's an agenda to push sex, heterosexual sex, homosex, all of it,
Yeah.
uh, gender discussion on
And
children that age. Like,
and,
I was just watching Teletubbies. I
yeah,
wasn't fucking with any of that. So
exactly.
I
Yeah,
don't.
that's what I'm saying. And I'm really glad you said that because there was one of the guests I had like on my podcast Vin Lloyd.
Mhm.
I respect a lot of the things he talks about, but there are a lot of people who would associate the phenomena I just described with the
Mhm.
entire LGBT community. And I think it's important to like take a moment to recognize that not every person in the
No,
LGBT
we don't just.
community wants to
No,
talk about anal sex with your children. Like,
no.
that's not the entirety of the
Right,
LGBT community. So, like, people are like, I just think, one of the things people should really think about is what consenting adults do in their own private time has
right,
absolutely nothing to do like with
right,
you. So
right.
like one of the like and yeah, I respect a lot of the things he talks about and some of the things he draws attention to,
Mhm.
but there is like a big push to like force your beliefs like on everyone else
Right.
like from certain religious like communities. And again, he would take issue with me calling what he believes a religion, but like at the end of the day, that's my opinion. But I just think if we all just focus on what we agree on, we would realize that most people agree on most things. Like, we
Right.
all just want to have like a chance to provide for ourselves, have a reasonably comfortable life, take a vacation, like every
Yeah.
now and then, and eat some good food. Like, this is what people want. And if everyone starts forcing purity tests, like on everyone to figure out if you don't agree with everything I say, then you're a
Right,
bad
right.
person. Like,
Yeah.
where does that lead us to? Like, say, for example, I'm a vegetarian. My
Right.
personal belief is I think, like, and again, I know you're going to disagree with me here, but I think that it's wrong for people to, kill in order to eat when we don't need to kill in order to eat. Now, I do accept there are more humane conditions, like in certain
Right.
things, but that's my personal belief. Now, I understand a lot of people will combat that with saying, eating, like animals eat each other all the time and we're animals. So, like, and that's what people would respond to that with. So, but the thing is, right, my personal beliefs and what I choose to do, I can talk to people about the benefits of being
Right.
vegetarian, and I can explain to people why I think it's a good thing. But if I start going around and accusing everyone of that, like who eats meat, like of being bad, evil people who hate
Right.
animals and all that, then I'm not going to get a particularly positive reaction from
Right.
people. So
Right.
it's like, if you really want people to understand what you're saying, like you have to approach them with like with you have to give them the benefit of the doubt until they give you a real reason, like for
Right.
you, like if you tell me, oh, like I hate all animals should die and all that, like they're just here like for
Well,
me
I
to be
wouldn't want
like,
to
all
be
right,
friends.
well,
I wouldn't
yeah,
want to be friends with anybody. I eat meat and I
yeah,
wouldn't want to be friends with anybody that feels that way anyway. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. I think
So it's like we can't force purity tests on everyone, man. That's
no.
not like, yeah, like, yeah.
No, I want to talk about real quick. There was a that kind of relates to that when we talk about the assumptions we make on people, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we have preconceived notions. You talked a little bit about like some of the people that might watch you have the preconceived notions about, and even the gentleman you interviewed previously.
Mm-hmm.
The what's happening is a direct correlation of people like gay people are pushing this. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
disagreeing with that entire statement. There are certainly gay people that are pushing this, but to say that a monolithic thought that every gay person feels that way, or every like the majority of gay people feel that way, is an incorrect statement to me.
Yeah.
So
And to say that we can't allow people to be like who they are and to
right,
be gay because of this very loud, minority that is pushing these things.
right,
Those are two different issues. Like what
right,
two consenting adults do is nobody's business. That's
right,
my personal opinion. Like whatever people do that are two consenting adults is no one's
right.
business. But now, and here's the funny thing, like about, another thing going on the left. Like I have actually seen now, like there was a TED talk that was instantly removed. I want to say like a day or two after, and you're also seeing certain university professors also push this, that pedophilia is a sexual orientation.
Yeah.
So that isn't coming from the right. Like
No,
that
it's
is,
not. It's
yeah,
coming
it's
from the
not.
left.
Yeah, but I consider myself someone on the left for the economic issues, which I believe, are the most important issues in society, because
Mhm.
when people are going through hard times, that's what really causes people to get tribal and start,
Right,
separating
right,
themselves and all that. So my personal belief is if we solve most of the economic problems, i.e., people are able to eat and, like have a reasonably comfortable life, we'll probably get along for the most part. So
right,
I would consider myself definitely more left than right. But that doesn't mean everyone on the left is subscribing
right.
to like all of these things. And it's
Yeah.
and like, say, for example, people on the right, like, one of the biggest things, right? The biggest, elements of pushback, people on the right have about the whole conversation about race is that they say everyone has equal opportunity in America. And so like it's like an even playing field. But it's like, in my opinion, the same way how I think people who say stuff like that on the right are the equivalent of people on the left who say you can give children hormone
Yeah.
blockers.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't happen. Like
I'm right
that's,
there. I'm right there with you
yeah,
on
like
that.
let's be real for a second. Like I'm not saying that white people today are guilty, like of all the things that white people in the past did. And I 100% believe that the overwhelming majority of white people, including people on the right, are not overtly racist. Like
Right.
racism is much better today than it was 60 years ago. I'm not
Right.
denying that.
Right.
But the truth is there are certain obstacles that people like in America, and I actually have more privilege than the average Black American because I'm an immigrant who came to America under certain circumstances that
Hmm.
African Americans here in America do not like deal with for the most part. If you look
Right.
at the way the education system is funded, like in this country, it's funded off property taxes. that means if you're born in a poor neighborhood, then the school you go to is not as good as the school in a rich neighborhood.
Right.
And we also know that there has traditionally been an excessive amount of discrimination against Black people in America that keeps their neighborhoods the poorest.
The way it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, how can we not look at these observable facts, right? And realize that there's a problem here. But that doesn't mean that all white people are evil. Like, and there are certain extreme voices in that community, like who do say stuff like that. So like, I'm not saying that doesn't exist either. In fact, like, and I'm gonna put out, another way I think, like, why I consider myself politically homeless. Like, there are a lot of people in the pro-Black community, right, who will say it's impossible to be, like pro-Black and then be in an interracial relationship. And I disagree with that. I think when I say the word pro-Black, the only reason that even needs to exist is because there is a lot of there was formerly a lot more racism, and there's still circumstances today that uniquely affect Black people more, I should say, like than other, groups of people. So it's like the need for it, like, exists because of history and because of, like what we have today. But depending on the beliefs, like, of the white person who you're with, like, yes, you can be in an interracial relationship and be, like pro-Black. Those two things can go hand in hand, in my opinion. But I do think, like, it's also okay to acknowledge the reality that there is self-hate, like in the Black community, that's been instilled because of the way history is taught. And, like, because of that. So you do see some people, who are going to be that vocal minority that I mentioned, who will say things like, oh, Black women are ratchet, they're terrible. That's why I only date white girls. So you can acknowledge the fact that there are people who say deeply offensive things about, their own race, and because they feel bad about themselves. But that doesn't mean, in my opinion, that you can't support correcting the situation for Black people today if you're in an interracial relationship. And unfortunately, there's some people, like, I don't want to say a lot of people, but there are a good amount of people in the pro-Black community who would attack me, like, for saying something like that and saying,
I'm trying to think, like, prolifically. I know he's been very memeable. It's a Dr.
Umar.
Dr. Umar. He's funny as hell.
Exactly.
But I know he doesn't vibe with interracial relationships at all. I want to point out something interesting though, from some of the points that he's made. I'm obviously Colombian, I'm Hispanic, so and I grew up in a prominently white community. So it was always kind of expected I would end up dating someone that's white. And my girlfriend is Finnish, so she's probably as white as you could possibly get. And what was interesting to me is Dr. Umar's talked about self-preservation. And I can understand, and that's probably a controversial statement for me to say, but when I think about minorities and Black people in general, when we think about from their perspective, if I put myself in their shoes and I see a dwindling of my culture in a certain retrospect, and I say, well, I'm losing my culture and my people. It'd be like the Native Americans when, if they had relationships with the white settlers, they would frown upon that as well. Whereas the white settlers would frown upon, a white man, Pocahontas, for example. But like a sense of self-preservation. So I don't think it's coming from a place where necessarily, from my perception as an outside minority, that it's necessarily all hate. I think a lot of it comes from self-preservation, and I can empathize with that because I think Candace Owens, who I have very controversial views about, but she has said that I think she was on stage with T.I. not that long ago, and she talked a lot about how Black people in America will eventually be outpaced by the incoming immigrants and Latinos and things like that. So I think a lot of that roots from a sense of self-preservation. So I empathize with very pro-Black people when they say, we want our communities to be pro-Black. And I understand where that comes from a logistical perspective, but there's also the emotional perspective. If the Black man falls in love with a white woman, like, who are we to say, you know, or a white man falls in love with a black woman? Who are we? You know what I'm saying? It comes back to that. So I want to say I
I agree.
empathize with why that is a point of
Yeah.
contention for a
And
lot of us.
everything you said, like, all that, that shows you having empathy, like
Yeah.
for that perspective. And,
Yeah.
that I agree with that. But like, and I agree, with everything you said just now too. But the only thing I would say, right, is the human experience, right? What like love is one of the most, like difficult things to find in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, like one of the most important things, I think, to
Mm-hmm.
having like, a full, fulfilling,
Experience.
like
Yeah.
human experience, right? So if you find someone who you truly love, right? Not out of self-hate, but because you truly vibe with the person and click with the
Yeah.
person, then my personal opinion is this is who you have to spend the rest of your life with. So the color of this person should not matter.
Right.
Now, with me personally, I don't have like anything at all against, white women, like Asian women,
Mm-hmm.
anything, but because I grew up in a black community
Right.
and
Right.
like I am considered black by most people,
Yeah.
like even though I'm half white, most people consider me black. Like because I just happen to be more attracted, for the most part, like to black and Latino women. Now, that's not to say I wouldn't date, a white woman if I was single and we
Right.
vibed like and all that and we got
Right.
along. Yeah, I would. But it just so happens that the people, like the woman who I've connected with and the woman who I vibe with just happen to be either black or Spanish for the most part. But
Right.
that doesn't mean that I have any hate towards those people. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean I wouldn't tell someone else like not to date, like people. And I think, it's perfectly fine to be attracted to blonde hair and blue eyes and, like it not being out of self-hate. Like maybe you like the way that looks. That doesn't mean like
Right.
I do think like if you're going around saying that, oh, like black women are ratchet, blah, 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 and like
Yeah,
all this
that's
stuff,
fucked up.
that's when it's a problem.
Yeah, that's a
But you're
problem.
allowed to be attracted to whatever it is, like that attracts you. But I just would encourage people to look at, the reasons why. And when I'm
Right.
looking for a partner, I'm looking for someone who I vibe with, like on a personal level and, who I connect with and all that. So like, that's probably why my dating choices, like, have been the way they are. But I would never, like, disparage anyone who's attracted, like to
Right.
something else. I would just say, don't put other people down,
For what
like,
they do. Yeah, for what
yeah,
they
yeah,
do.
yeah,
Absolutely. I
like
think
that's
another
yeah.
thing too with that is like historically speaking, when you think of like ancient peoples typically married within their tribe, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they're culturally, you're gonna normally be attracted to what you were brought up into or
Exactly.
what you'll have those outliers. You might have that ginger kid that really likes black women. Good for him. You know,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Jack
yeah.
Harlows or whatever. But like the typically, and that was I personally believe that's a means of making sure that the tribe or the race of that people continued on. So you would typically marry and you see it all throughout history, like you would typically marry and reproduce with men and women that looked like you, were in your tribe, within your communities. That's a normal thing. So I don't know why people get so bent out of shape. It's like, yeah, of course, is the for you example, like especially that's what you grew up knowing, you know. You're probably not gonna like Becky from Hobby Lobby because you don't
Yeah,
have the same cultural, vibe at all
but
going on
exactly,
there.
but like
Right.
here's the thing. It's just like right, like some of my favorite, like the things I watch on TV, like the music I listen to. It's just like it's just like the people I connect with,
Right.
like are the people I connect with. Like it's nothing to do with
Right.
me
Right.
hating or not liking, like
Right.
anyone else. It's just
Yeah.
who I connect with. So, I do think it's important though that we all realize that there are problems in the world,
Right.
like that need to be solved. And obviously, if you're a black person and, the white person you happen to be dating is someone who advocates for policies, that are damaging, like,
Right.
to black people, then you're going to get, certain reactions. So,
Right.
like, yeah, I get that completely. But, like, if like my only thing is like Barack Obama did get elected, so we do know that most people aren't overtly like, you know, racist, but
Right.
they have differences in opinions and different life experiences, that mean that the truth is most Black people can't fully explain systemic racism and what's being done to them. So if most Black people can't explain it, how
Right.
can you expect the average white person who
To
isn't even
understand it.
who isn't even affected by the problem to like truly understand
Right.
it, right? So it's like people have different experiences that lead them to the beliefs that they have. And they may be right, they may be wrong, but
Right.
the reason they have those, you know, beliefs is because of their life experience for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think a little bit more empathy, and
Go a long way.
yeah, it goes a long way. And let's give people the benefit of the doubt until they give us a reason, you know, to not like give them the benefit of the doubt, until they give you a real solid reason. I told you, all right, this is just a hateful person, you know, like
Right.
who isn't accepting like any evidence and all that. But I do think it's important to understand that, you know, we all have different life experiences that lead us to the conclusions, you know, that
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. I agree with everything you just said.
yeah,
100%.
so,
100%.
yeah. So you know, with that being said, we got a solid you know, hour and a
Oh
half,
yeah, I was gonna
you
say
know,
we
like
out here.
yeah, into this conversation. So I think we're about to start wrapping it up now. But you know, before we do that, are there any final thoughts? You know, you wanted to share any message, you know, you wanted to put out there to the viewers?
Yeah. You know, just try to have more nuance in your
Mm,
conversations with people. Understand that I think media has done a fantastic job of kind of pitting us against each other. My brother, one of my older brothers, always told me if people talked more with each other and less at each
mm-hmm,
other, we would definitely accomplish more. And you'd find that like Jay and I, for example, we come from completely different worlds and we
mm-hmm,
vibe on a lot of things. And it's crazy. I think the more you kind of put yourself out there and realize that people, even the people you think you would hate the most and not get along with,
mm-hmm,
there's people that uh like the pronoun people, the LGBT mafia people, there's
mm-hmm,
people in that movement that I genuinely uh respect as people. I may not agree with them, but I've been able to have conversations with different people from different backgrounds, and I think my ability to try to be humble and understand that everybody's coming from a different perspective and that's okay. And we're also very largely input by our own prejudices about things and how we were raised. And the biggest emphasis for me is to be able to have conversations with people that I may or may not, you know, agree with, but that's cool.
exactly.
Um, and another thing for anybody that's gay that's watching, I want to share this really short story because I think it's super important. For many years, I spent working on a factory, auto manufacturing plant here in rural Ohio. And that was a very profound experience because it was working blue collar work and it was very hard work, very physically intensive. And most of my managers were white men, about my father's age, so boomer age, and mostly all white people. Very lack of diversity there. I never made an emphasis to talk about my sexual orientation or anything like that with anybody because I just, I knew I kind of could read the room and realize it's a very
Mm-hmm,
conservative area. I'm not going to say much. But one of my managers became very much like a father figure to me. His daughter's the same age as me, would look out for me. And one day he was talking to me and we were discussing dating. His daughters were dating. And he said, "Well, aren't you dating someone?" I said, I was very kind of quiet about it. And he kind of
mm-hmm.
paused and he's like, "Well, we know you're gay." And I said, "Well, how did you know?" And he's like, "Well, we kind of figured like you didn't say much about, who
Mm,
you were dating or anything. We kind of had this gumption that you were." And I said, I didn't want to tell anybody because like I don't want to, it's not the most important thing at my workplace either. But he's like, a lot of us didn't agree with it, but then we got to know you as a person. We realized like it's not that big of a deal. And most of these people are in their 40s and 50s and 60s.
mm-hmm,
So retire close to retirement age. And a lot of them told me later on, they're like, we used to have an issue with it, but like we realized and we got to know you and you're not anything like we thought you were, like projected their projected preconceived notions of what gay people were like. And that was kind of a learning lesson for them and it was a learning lesson for me because I realized if I was just myself, without an agenda, without trying to push anything on anybody and just live my life and most people will see that, and that'll change the perception of things. You don't have to go out screaming and try to make people accept you. Just be yourself. Like, it's very cliche, but it's worked very well for me, because it's enabled me to have conversations with people that I think otherwise, if they had known up front, they probably would have been like, I don't know if I want to have this conversation. So that's just the last thing I want to share.
Yeah, no, that's a really important thing. Just realize everyone who you disagree with, like on certain issues, you likely agree with them on a lot of other issues too.
Yep.
So it's like, rather than only focusing all of our attention on the places where we disagree, we should all in general make an effort to talk about the areas we agree on, and focus on that.
Absolutely.
And then naturally, a lot of those differences and areas where we disagree, they'll wind up working themselves out, like in one way or another too.
Absolutely.
So thanks for sharing that. That's a really powerful story right there.
Absolutely.
So, but all right, Alicia, definitely want to take, a second to thank you for coming on the
Thank
JSA.
you for having me on here.
Exactly. Thank you for the JSA podcast, J. Scott Ascension. Anyone who enjoyed this conversation, make sure that you like the video, you share, you subscribe, and get the word out. This is actually my reintroduction back to YouTube. I've been suffering censorship for some of the conversations I've had in the past. So I'm going to start uploading to YouTube again. I hope they don't kick away my channel. So, but yeah, make sure you share, subscribe, like, and check out ascensionmediaclub.com. I'll be going to Egypt next month, where I'll be writing about the ancient history and, a lot of the things I'm experiencing over there. So please make sure you're checking the website regularly, and you'll find all my social media links on there too, so you can, be a part of the trip too. So thanks everyone for watching, and have a great day. And thank you, Alicia.
No problem. Thanks, Jay.
All right. Bye.
Bye.